It was a quiet, sunny morning in the suburbs. Birds chirped, sprinklers sprayed fresh water across bright green lawns, and most people were still sipping their coffee. On the corner of Maple Lane stood a tall, white house with flower beds along the walkway. An elderly black man, dressed in slacks, a button-up shirt, and a brown hat, stood calmly in front of it. His name was Mr. Elijah Turner. He didn't rush, he just looked at the home like it held 100 memories. But not everyone saw peace. Across the street, a woman peered through her blinds. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't recognize the man, and her mind went to the worst place. She picked up her phone and whispered, "There's a suspicious man outside a house. I think he's trying to break in." 10 minutes later, police sirens pierced the calm air. Red and blue lights flashed across Elijah's face. And everything changed. Police Chief Brad Mitchell stepped out of his cruiser, hand resting near his holster. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and known in town as someone who didn't ask questions twice. He looked at Elijah with a cold stare. "Sir, what are you doing here?" he asked sharply. Elijah turned slowly, his hands still by his sides. "Just looking at the yard." "This is my house," he said calmly. Brad raised an eyebrow. "You're saying you own this place?" "Yes," Elijah said, his voice steady. "Since 1979. But Brad didn't believe him. He thought Elijah was stalling. He waved over two other officers and pointed. "We've got a trespasser. Take him in." Elijah didn't fight. He gently tried to explain. "My name is Elijah Turner. I can prove it if you let me." But the handcuffs were already clicking around his wrists. Neighbors gathered on their porches, some whispering, some watching silently. One young boy across the street asked his mom, "Why are they arresting that old man?" She didn't answer. As Elijah was placed in the back of the squad car, he looked once more at the house. His house. The same one he and his wife built brick by brick. Chief Mitchell didn't notice the sadness in Elijah's eyes. He thought he had just caught a trespasser. But he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. Back at the station, Elijah sat quietly on a hard bench, his hands still cuffed. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He just waited. Chief Mitchell stood at the front desk, filling out paperwork. "Name?" he asked without looking up. "Elijah J. Turner," the old man said softly. Mitchell rolled his eyes. "Date of birth?" "March 12, 1948. Behind the desk, a young records clerk named Rachel was listening. She was new to the job and didn't like how things were handled that day. Something about the man didn't sit right with her, not because he looked dangerous, but because he didn't. As Mitchell continued filling out the arrest report, Rachel quietly typed the name Elijah J. Turner into the city's property records. She blinked, then blinked again. There it was, 135 Maple Lane, owned by Elijah J. Turner since 1979. Her hands started to shake as she printed out the document. She walked slowly toward Chief Mitchell, who was still standing near Elijah. "Sir, you need to see this." Mitchell snatched the paper with a frown. But when he read the name on the deed, his face went pale. Elijah J. Turner, it read in bold letters. Owner, no mortgage. Fully paid, no record of sale. The chief stared at the paper, his fingers trembling slightly. Then he looked up at Elijah, the man he had just arrested, and for the first time he didn't see a suspect. He saw a man he had wronged. Without a word he reached for the keys and slowly unlocked the cuffs. "I didn't know," he muttered. Elijah didn't yell. He just said, "You didn't ask." Chief Mitchell stood frozen, holding the deed like it was on fire. The office had gone quiet. No one dared say a word. He looked at Elijah again. This time, not as a stranger, but as a man who had every right to be exactly where he had been standing. "Turner," he said slowly, "I'm sorry. This was a mistake." Elijah nodded once. "Yes. It was." Mitchell's voice cracked. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I did," Elijah replied, his tone calm. "You just weren't listening." A long silence followed. The chief let out a deep breath and motioned toward the front desk. "Let's clear this up." Rachel, the young clerk, helped Elijah sit down and offered him water. "I'm so sorry, sir," she said quietly. Elijah gave her a kind smile. "It's not your fault." As they filed the release paperwork, Chief Mitchell couldn't stop looking at the document. He kept reading Elijah's name, over and over again. He remembered the house now, vaguely. He thought it had always belonged to someone else. He had passed by it 100 times, never knowing its history. But what shook him the most wasn't the paper. It was how calm Elijah remained. No shouting, no anger. Just disappointment. When Elijah left the station, the sun was still shining outside. He took a slow breath and walked down the steps, his back straight, his steps steady. Brad Mitchell watched him go. A tight knot growing in his chest. He had enforced the law for over 20 years. But today he realized he hadn't served justice. He had served assumption. That evening, Elijah sat on a bench across from the house on Maple Lane. The front yard still had the roses his wife had planted. Some had withered. Others bloomed, reaching toward the sun like they always had. Rachel, the young clerk, showed up after her shift. She brought Elijah a sandwich and asked softly, "Can I sit with you?" He nodded. For a moment they just sat in silence. Then Elijah began to speak. "I built that house in 1979. Me and my wife Lillian. Back then, this neighborhood didn't look the same. No sidewalks, no fancy fences. And no one that looked like me lived here." Rachel listened closely, eyes wide. "We were young, full of hope, saved every penny to buy the land, poured concrete with our own hands, painted the walls together. That porch, she designed it. Said she wanted a place to drink sweet tea and watch the sunset." He smiled softly at the memory, but there was pain behind his eyes. "Wasn't easy though. First month in, someone threw a rock through our window. It had a note tied to it. Said, 'Go back where you came from.'" Rachel gasped. Elijah nodded. "Yeah, cops came, but they didn't care. Said it was probably just some kids." He looked at the house again. "But we stayed. Because it was ours. Because we believed we belonged here too." Rachel's voice was barely a whisper. "What happened to your wife?" "She passed 10 years ago," he said quietly. "Cancer." He rubbed his hands together. "After that I rented the place out. Couldn't stand to be in it without her. But today was the first time I came back, just to look. To feel close to her." Rachel wiped a tear from her cheek. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Turner." He smiled kindly. "Don't be. Not your fault." But deep down, she knew it was everyone's fault. Everyone who looked away, everyone who assumed, and everyone who stayed silent. Chief Brad Mitchell sat alone in his office, long after everyone else had gone home. The room was quiet, but his mind wasn't. He stared at the deed that still sat on his desk. Elijah J. Turner. The name burned in his memory. Brad had always seen himself as fair. Tough, yes. But fair. He told himself he didn't judge people. That he just followed the law. But today proved something he didn't want to face. He hadn't followed the law. He had followed a feeling. A gut reaction, based on a man's skin, not his actions. He thought back to his father, a cop in the same town. He remembered his dad saying, "Keep your eyes open. People like that don't belong here." Brad had never repeated those words. But maybe, deep down, he had believed them. He looked at the photo of his daughter on his desk. She was 11. Smart. Kind. Always asking questions. What would she think if she saw him today? Brad stood up and walked to the window. The night air outside was still. But inside his heart was storming. He sat back down, grabbed a notepad and started writing. "Mr. Turner, I owe you more than an apology." The words were hard to write. But they had to be said. Because something had to change. And maybe, that change had to start with him. By the next morning, word had spread. A video taken by a neighbor, showing Elijah in handcuffs, had gone viral on local social media. The comments flooded in. Some people were angry. Disgusting. He owns that house. This is racism plain and simple. Others tried to defend Brad. Mistakes happen. He didn't know. Let it go. By the end of the day, the town council called an emergency meeting. The room was packed. Some stood in the aisles. Reporters showed up. Tension hung in the air. Elijah was invited to speak. He stepped up to the podium, dressed in the same button-up shirt he wore the day before. His voice was calm. Steady. I've lived in this town longer than most of you. He began. Built my house with my own 2 hands. Paid my taxes. Loved my neighbors. Even when they didn't love me back. People listened closely. No one interrupted. I wasn't angry when I was arrested. I was tired of proving I belong in a place I've already earned. His eyes scanned the room. I'm not here to ruin anyone's career. I'm here because I believe this town can do better. We have to stop assuming. Start listening. Start seeing each other. A hush fell over the room. Then Elijah said something that made a few people tear up. I never stopped loving this town. Even when it stopped loving me. The room was quiet for a long time. Then one person stood and clapped. Then another. And another. Soon the room was full of applause. But one man wasn't clapping. Chief Mitchell. He sat in the back, eyes lowered. Because he knew. The hardest part was still to come. The day after the town meeting, Chief Brad Mitchell walked into the mayor's office with a letter in his hand. I'd like to resign, he said. The mayor looked up, surprised. Brad, no one's calling for your job. You made a mistake. I didn't just make a mistake. Brad interrupted. I showed everyone what happens when we stop seeing people as people. The mayor sighed. We don't need you to quit. We need you to fix this. That's when she slid a folder across the desk. Inside were plans for a new community training program. Focused on racial bias, de-escalation, and empathy. We want you to lead it. And we want Mr. Turner to help you build it. Brad stared at the folder for a long time. Then nodded. Later that week, Brad showed up at Elijah's door. This time, he didn't storm up the driveway. He didn't bark orders. He knocked. Elijah answered slowly. For a moment the two men just stood there. Then Brad held out his hand. I'm here to ask for your help, he said. To do better. To make sure this never happens again. Elijah looked at the hand for a second. Then shook it. All right, he said. But I'm not here to clean up your mess. I'm here to teach. Good, Brad replied. Because I've got a lot to learn. For the first time in a long time. Both men smiled. They stood on the same porch, where so much had gone wrong. Ready to build something right. Weeks passed. The community training program began at the local center. Officers sat side by side with citizens. They listened to stories, not just facts. They talked about fear, history, and healing. Elijah Turner spoke at the first session. He didn't lecture. He told stories about growing up in a time when doors were locked tighter for people who looked like him. About building a life with love and patience. Even when the world tried to break it apart. Chief Mitchell sat in the front row. He didn't speak much. He just listened. Really listened. For the first time in years. Something in the town shifted. It was small, but it was real. People waved more. Assumptions slowed. Questions replaced silence. And one morning, Elijah stood once more in front of his old house. This time, no police cars came. No stares from windows. Just birds, flowers. And the memory of a woman who once dreamed of sunsets and sweet tea. Rachel, the young clerk, drove by and stopped. Back again, Mr. Turner? She asked with a smile. He nodded. Just visiting old ghosts. She smiled. You thinking of moving back in? Elijah looked at the porch, the windows, the sky. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I already have. As she drove away, Elijah sat on the steps. The wind rustled the trees. A rose petal drifted down and landed at his feet. It was quiet again on Maple Lane. But this time, it felt different. It felt like home.